So, I mean, you're all familiar. I've presented before about Floodwatch, which is a project that I coordinate in New York City. And since 2018, we've been engaging with communities to report local street level flooding in the neighborhoods around Jamaica Bay, in Queens and Brooklyn, and also now up in the Bronx. And so essentially 2021 has been a pretty big year with a lot of cool updates. And so yeah, I thought so some of these things, I guess people were interested in hearing a little bit about the data visualization and also the flood sensor network that we've gotten involved in. So I'll just give an overview of everything essentially that happened and all the progress that we made in this year on both of those topics. And just to start off, we held some workshops this year. It was all virtual because of COVID, but we got a lot of really good stakeholder feedback about the Floodwatch program. And so the way Floodwatch works right now is we have a survey 123 form. It goes into a online database where it kind of like disappears into nothing in a way. A lot of people don't engage with the data after it's been submitted. And so that was some of the feedback we heard, that it seems like it just goes, the reports just go into a black box. It's difficult to understand the data, difficult to access it. And residents felt like they needed an easy way to share flood reports with their like elected officials or city agencies. People were certainly showing reporting fatigue, where, you know, how many times can you take a picture of a flood in the exact same location, particularly when it feels like nothing is happening and it's not going towards anything. And then from the research side and the city agency side, there was a sense that the data coming out of the Floodwatch program was not really robust enough for decision making or for kind of improving the models and all these kind of things that we were hopeful Floodwatch would contribute towards. And so this year we took that feedback and kind of turned it into some new products to address a lot of those issues that we heard from the stakeholders. And the first of those is a better data portal and visualization, so that it's not just going into a black box, it's like building engagement around the photos and providing better access to the data. And then the second thing is the flood sensors, which help to fill in the gaps when people aren't reporting. And it also provides more accurate data that is more useful to researchers and decision makers. So to start with the data portal and visualization, I thought it might be helpful for each of these things to talk a little bit about the process and the funding that we got to do these projects. So for data visualization, this was a partnership with the New York City Mayor's Office of Climate Resiliency, who were operating as a FEMA cooperating technical partner. So the money was coming from FEMA through the mayor's office to Sea Grant and the Science and Resilience Institute to work on the designing a data portal and visualization of the Floodwatch data. And we contracted Pratt Spatial Analysis and Visualization Initiative. They're experts in geospatial data design. And because of that, so through that funding, we were able to work with Pratt. We had more workshops with the residents to talk through how can we make this data actually useful for you. Pratt made some prototypes, presented them back to the residents and to the agencies that we're working with, and sort of just started this conversation about what might it look like to have a really useful data portal, rather than just creating something that people are never going to use or that kind of just reinvents the wheel. So this is just one page of the website prototype that or wireframe that they created. And none of this is live yet. This is still very much the first iteration of it. But some of the issues that came up was not wanting to be like identifiable down to the actual address from flood insurance and property value perspective. But yeah, so this is part of what we came up with, and a lot of the residents were pretty excited about it. Probably more excited about the next thing, which is these community flood reports. And this was coming out of, we heard that they just that people don't want to have to like mess around on the website and like figure everything out themselves. They just want a pamphlet, like a 2-page PDF to hand over to their elected officials or just decision makers, so that they can see like, okay, what has actually been collected and what can we do about it. So this is a prototype of one of those kind of flood reports that we could have automated every 6 months or so. And that would be a communication tool using all the FloodWatch data. This was all this past year. We were working with Pratt and the community members and stakeholders. And then we just got funding through the Sloan Foundation to actually continue doing this and make it live and functional. So it's pretty exciting news there. And in the meantime, I built a data dashboard. I'm not going to go in. I don't think it's, if anyone's interested, I can show you the data dashboard. This is kind of like a stopgap for between when we actually get the real data portal up and running. It's just a data dashboard. Jess, do you think I should?
Yeah.
Oh, you think I should share it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
We're in the same place there, Katie, trying to figure those things out. So any learning that we could do.
Okay. If only I could figure out how to get out of this. Oh yeah, okay. So this is all created through ArcGIS Online. And it might be kind of making my computer crazy, but, oh, okay. So let me zoom out really quickly. So any new reports come up here. So I just designed this all and I don't know much about any of this stuff, but I did my best. And so it shows all the reports. The ones that are within the last month show up in red. These are actually all just test ones. And then the older reports are in gray. And then on the timeline on the bottom, you can kind of see where were the peaks. And then you say like, oh, this looks like an interesting event. Let me focus in on that event. And then you can zoom in and see the reports that were submitted for a particular flood event, scroll through and actually see all the photos. And what else? And you can download the data, a CSV file of the data. It can either be filtered or it's the whole data set. And that's all, as long as you have an ArcGIS account, you can download that data, it's public. And it hides any personal information, like it doesn't have anyone's email address or any sort of like personally identifiable information in that data download, which was another issue I was running into with sharing the data before. Any questions about?
Yeah, I have a question. So what is the data so is it only basically the data would be number of flood reports and the pictures of it, or does it give you any tide heights or things like weather data or anything?
It doesn't, no, there's no like weather. Well, it's only weather if it's self-reported.
Oh, that's right. So this is your data list, yeah.
Yeah, so you can zoom in and there's no way. I've been trying to fix this pop-up box. If anyone knows how to change the dimensions of it, but it's really small. So yeah, if the person submitted how deep it is or the weather, then that'll go there, and that's the full flood report. I got rid of some of the other categories that were just taking up space.
And these reports come in via Survey 123?
Yes, so it automatically updates. So I just have to like pray that no one submits anything crazy.
And Katie, I asked you this in the chat, but when they submit through Survey 123, they don't have to tell you what time of day or where it is because it geolocates. Is that correct?
They do have to say what time of day.
Okay.
And it geolocates, so that's automatic, or you can select on the map where you are. But I also asked them to say what neighborhood is the report from, just so that I can make sure there's nothing off.
Mm-hmm.
And you built this yourself, Katie, with your AGOL skills?
Yes,
Nice.
my learning on the fly, Googling every single thing along the way. Right. Are there any other questions about that dashboard? Nope. So, oh, and any questions about these data visualizations that we did with Pratt?
Yeah, so I'm curious, so then the survey 123 data that you've created, the database, then there's some sort of an algorithm that then will feed into this?
That I'm not as sure about. It works seamlessly with the ArcGIS data dashboard, but Pratt likes it in a different format. So they had to for this project, I had to put everything into an Airtable for them. And then they uploaded it into this. But yeah, the data format, that's a big question is, do we continue using survey 123? Do we go to MyCoast? Like a lot of questions about what tool do we use? And it really just comes down to what's easy for people to use and what puts it in the data format that can be fed into other
Yeah.
apps.
I'd love to have more of a conversation with you on that, because I know that, we're trying to figure out what that portal looks like, how you present information. But then I heard Wes say one day from MyCoast, he said, well, maybe we ought to go into ArcGIS, put our stuff into ArcGIS. So, it would be interesting to have that conversation, if they're going that direction and you're leaving that direction, so that would be interesting.
Yeah, and you'll see it gets more complicated because we have the flood sensors now wanting to overlay on the map, and a different group working on the flood sensor data. So
Katie,
I like the data though.
Yeah, it looks amazing. Can any of your volunteers access the data, or do you have to provide them with these 1-pagers or 2-pagers?
So they will be able to just do a data download. Yeah.
And can they actually access the ArcGIS data?
Yep, through the dashboard. That's how you can access it.
They can. Okay, that's
yeah.
Cool.
Yep.
Katie, can you kind of walk us through this report, this in the neighborhood report a little bit? And
Yeah.
Information is on there.
Yeah. So this is the actual wireframe now. Yeah, so we were trying, oops, how do I do that? So this is sort of like what is it going to look like zoomed out, sort of divided into community districts in New York City, and then color coded to say like how many flood reports are there. And then as you zoom in, you start to see these little hexagons, which show more closely or in more detail how many reports there are per little area. And keep zooming in, and then you get closer and closer. And these hexagons were one solution to not identifying an exact like street corner, just for sensitivity to people's privacy. And then on the side, then you would be able to see like what is the group of flood reports that exist in this hexagon, and you could shift through those and see them. And this is all, I mean, this is the very first attempt at creating this. I think it's a good start, but there's a lot of things I would like to see, like tide gauges and that kind of stuff. But that's basically the map. And then is there another zoom out? Okay, I guess that was that for the frame, for the wireframe. And then the report puts it in a little bit more context. It shows all of the flood reports in a community district or a neighborhood, or however we want to define it, and then gets into a little more detail about how many property lots are affected by tidal flooding now, how many will be affected in the future. The goal here was to kind of get a little bit more of like a future focused lens about like, okay, this is the issue now and what could it be with sea level rise, so that kind of gets communicated to the elected officials it has some context for a number of reports over time with some events like Hurricane Michael. I think this is, yeah, older stuff. And one thing that we were proud of was this little rain boot, because the average height of the rain boot apparently is 16 inches. So then you have a sense of like how often is it so deep that you can't walk through it without your rain boots or even with your rain boots. For this, we incorporated 311 calls. In New York, that's the number you use to call to make a complaint. So there's a lot of flood complaints here, and that provides a little bit more context about how frequent flooding is year by year. And then it's the photos of different flood events that happen in a certain period. And those are those. Any questions about any of that?
Could you scroll back up just to show the top of that one with the,
Yeah.
and it was it easy to get the 311 call breakdown? I mean, you're
Yeah,
working
this
with
was all what Pratt did. So,
Yeah.
but New York City is pretty good with open data from 311.
Thanks.
Mhm.
I have no idea if we have a 311 to call these things.
Katie, I don't know if you know this yet, but how often do you plan on updating these reports?
Yeah, we were talking about that. Maybe it could be every 6 months. Or it could just be whenever anyone wants one, it just gets automatically generated.
Hmm,
That would be ideal, but I don't know if that's possible.
yeah,
But the only way they would change a lot would be if there was some major event. So maybe it would just be, we would run it after a major flood event.
these look awesome. Such a great job.
I was so amazed, like with working with Pratt, with so little information, they just come back after like a day and they're like, what about this? Like, this is amazing. I can't, yeah.
It's a pretty cool way to use the flood report data.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, if you think of any other questions about those, and I could share the PDFs if you're interested in looking at it in more detail.
So is this kind of like what the coastal managers wanted that they weren't getting before? Any kind of feedback about if they like the format or they're actually making decisions based on it?
That's a good question. And so for this, the workshop we had, it was mostly residents. And it became apparent that they wanted to communicate what they already knew was happening, to communicate that to like city officials to get, or state or federal to get funding for projects. But no, short answer, I think the next round of workshops, we would want to include those kinds of people and make sure that this is communicating the kind of information that's helpful for them.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, there's certainly value with kind of objectively quantifying those observations.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's really great to help people make sure that they are saying what they want to say, and then checking if the people who are hearing it, if it's effective with them. So everybody
true.
gets to be part of the communication process.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and the way in New York City every year, every community board submits their priority requests to the city for funding. And so like attaching something like this to their request could help just put it all in a little bit more context. Like, why are we, why is it year after year we're asking for more money for chronic flooding? It's like here you can see how bad it is. So yeah, I'm optimistic that they become useful. Okay, I'm going to move on to flood sensors unless there's any objections. Okay. All right, so the next big thing we did this past year was started a pilot project with flood sensors that very quickly became a huge citywide project. And again, I'll just tell you a bit about the process, because I think it's kind of, if there's an interest in sensors, you can kind of see different partners and funding mechanisms and ways to approach a flood sensor network. And so from my side, it started with, I work very closely with the Science and Resilience Institute at Jamaica Bay, and they applied for a CUNY interdisciplinary climate crisis research grant to pilot flood sensors around Jamaica Bay. And so I became a part of that team because of my work with Floodwatch and kind of like community relationships and knowledge of where flooding is more frequent. And we also partnered with the CUNY Advanced Science Research Center, which they have an educational sensor lab, which has turned out to be really critical to the project, Center for the Study of Brooklyn, and SRIJB and Sea Grant. And Center for the Study of Brooklyn brought a really interesting like community engagement, participatory action research kind of a lens to all the work we were doing. So it was an interesting collaborative effort. And in this project, the Advanced Science Center created this design for low cost sensors. And so basically the sensor fits in a PVC pipe, which gets attached to like a telephone pole. It runs on solar and it's constantly sending a signal down to the ground. And as soon as the water on the street starts to rise, that signal starts hitting the water. And so it measures the depth of the water as it rises and falls. And it's constantly sending this signal back to a gateway. Oh, I just realized I should put this in slideshow mode so you can see the whole thing. It sends it back to a gateway, and that gateway, it's like a receiver, and it has to be put somewhere within 1.5 miles or 2 miles, probably 1.5 miles of the sensor itself. And so like, for example, in Hamilton Beach, we put it in a firehouse because that was the tallest building in Hamilton Beach. It has to be connected into the internet. And then it also definitely helps that a place like a firehouse is probably going to have a generator and will maintain electricity during any sort of like a storm event, so that we don't lose electricity and then lose all of our data from the sensor if there is a major storm. So in Jamaica Bay, we put in a total of 6 sensors. We started with sensors in Hamilton Beach, where we started with Floodwatch. We worked really closely with the New Hamilton Beach Civic Association, and kind of because we had built those relationships, they were the first ones we turned to when we were thinking of putting in a sensor, particularly like thinking of the sensitivities of having a sensor, having someone come in from the outside, and sort of this like surveillance aspect, I think can make people uncomfortable. But luckily we had these really strong relationships and trust in the community. And Roger was kind of our #1 proponent of Floodwatch, and he was excited for this. So because of that, we were able to start there. We put 3 that are over the street in different streets where we knew they were already flooding. And then 1 was over this picture here on the bottom picture is just sitting over the water at a local marina, like a really small marina. And so that just is giving super hyper local tide gauge data so that we can relate the tide to the street flooding. And then once we were established in Hamilton Beach, we got sensors out in Far Rockaway. And for that, we worked with the Rockaway Institute for Sustainability and Equity, who are also Floodwatch partners. And because that's a youth education program, it was like a very different model of engagement, which was an interesting path to take because we engaged students in summer projects where they learned how to put together a sensor, they learned how to read the sensor data, and then basically they just were hands-on learning about the project and about sea level rise. And it was really a cool way to do it. And I'm hopeful that as we expand the sensor network, that kind of STEM education will keep being a part of it as we go. And I've loved having these sensors. I think so every time there's a flood and I emailed my Floodwatch group and I say it's going to be a 8-foot tide above mean low or low water. I think those numbers aren't always meaningful to people, but now I can start to match the tide gauge data to the actual street flood data. So I can say, so it starts to help like establish local thresholds. So I know that at an 8-foot tide, there was 9 inches of water on this one particular street, but at a 7-foot 2-inch flood, there was no water. And so you start getting a sense event after event of what is the exact threshold for the flooding on this street. And then when I send out an alert, I can say, it's going to be an 8-foot tide. Last time that happened, this is what we saw. And so it really it's really helpful for me as a communication tool to be able to set expectations of a high tide. And then also it helps to be able to match photos to the street, the actual depth of the water, without asking people to go out with a ruler, because I was really shocked when I saw what a 3 inches of water on the street is a much more expansive flood than I think I really pictured in my mind. And so to be able to match anyone who takes a photo, like this big photo came in through Floodwatch, and it just so happened that there's a sensor right across the street. So I could go back and look at like what was the exact level of water on this street when this photo was taken, and then have that for context.
Katie, what is you said 3 inches, so what is the minimum amount of flooding that the flood sensor will take?
It picks up the tiny, it picks up like a centimeter. Yeah, it's very sensitive. And in the other locations where they don't have PVC pipe, they've had a lot of issues with like someone putting a trash bag under it, or a piece of trash just blows into it, or when it snowed, it was picking up the snow instead of the water. So, but the PVC pipe helps a lot with that.
Katie, do you label the sensors at all? Like, do you have stickers or program markings on them?
Yes. Yeah, we have stickers. I think, yeah, you can kind of see the sticker right here. But
Oh, okay.
it
Yeah,
has
that's
contact
on the-
information. Yeah.
That's great. How much of your
When the person submitted that photo, did they estimate the water depth?
That's a good question. I don't think so.
Okay.
You're wondering how good people are at estimating water? Or,
Yeah.
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 I know I'm really bad at it. So I don't know if that's a rule, but
It'd also be very different, like depending on where you're looking in that picture.
true.
If you're just talking about water depth.
Yeah, you're right. So from that pilot project, things took off like incredibly quickly. And because meanwhile, NYU, New York University, was working on their own pilot project with flood sensors from a totally different angle. They were a water quality team, and they wanted to go take samples of rainwater that had collected on the streets to take it back to the lab and get water quality readings. And they could never time it right to go get their sample when there was actually water on the street. And so they were getting frustrated, and they were like, let's just build a sensor that tells us when there's water on the street and we can run out and collect it. So they were building sensors, and then the mayor's office of climate resiliency knew that we were both doing these pilot sensor programs and decided to connect us. And all of it came together into a program that's now called FloodNet. And it's technically a collaboration between the city, NYU, and CUNY. And I kind of just like follow along and talk about Floodwatch as much as I can. So FloodNet, we got a fancy logo, got a lot of resources just from the get-go to do some like graphic design. So it's actually it has a nice, everything looks very nice on FloodNet. And so we all started working together, and this was all actually, we started working together before Ida, and kind of collaborating and talking about our sensors and how did our program go. And then Ida hit in New York City, and the city became extremely aware of the lack of information that they had about street level flooding, and the need to have a better way to record this. And so there was a lot of focus on rain-driven flooding. And so the city decided to fund like a huge expansion of the flood sensor network. So where NYU had started in Gowanus, we had started in Hamilton Beach. Now this is a little bit this is a little bit outdated. I think they actually now want to do 500 sensors in the next 5 years. There's a huge team that's going to be working on it. the Science and Resilience Institute is hiring a public engagement specialist to work just on the sensor deployments. And we're trying to incorporate community engagement in a lot of different ways. And so it's very exciting and taking up a lot of time, but in a really like positive way. Oh, this was what I was alluding to before. The city is working with FieldKit, which is another web design firm, to make an interface for the flood sensor network. And they held a bunch of community workshops as well. And so this is giving, it's all going to work out, but it's giving me a little bit of a headache about how are we going to integrate flood watch and flood sensors. And oh, I just want to end with this point, which is related to that, because there were definitely some moments where I was worried that flood watch was becoming obsolete because of the flood sensor network. And but the more I've been involved, the more I've kind of realized that they both add a lot of value to each other and strengthen each other as programs. And so like Floodwatch has these strong community relationships. And through that, there's local knowledge of frequently flooded locations. As more flood sensors get placed, we will have a way for communities to sort of document where it is flooding, to advocate where they need a flood sensor. The photos provide visual context, which came up a lot in the workshops that FieldKit held, where it's like, well, we don't, what is a line that sometimes goes up and down? Like, what does that really mean? So the photos can help provide some context if it's a way to click on it and see what does that look like when there's this much flood. And it also, this to me is one of the most critical things that I think Floodwatch could bring to the flood sensor network, is that it's active engagement. It's not just put out a sensor and sometimes look at the data. And this is a way for people to get involved and to take photos and feel like they're contributing. They're like part of that network. It's not just a passive data collection. And then FloodNet helps fill a lot of the issues that I brought up in the beginning. The flood sensor data helps to fill in that data set so that it's accurate and precise, and then people don't feel obligated to be constantly reporting. And which is actually another issue with Flood Watch, that it's not necessarily very equitable, because the people who have time to go out and be constantly reporting are the people who have more time in general. And so we don't necessarily get as many from lower income neighborhoods where people are perhaps more time poor. And so that's something that I love about flood sensors, is that then the onus is on the city to be aware of what's happening. It's not on the community to be constantly reporting. And the last piece is that it validates the photographs, which they do tell a story, but it provides a validity that sometimes people need. Even though they see the photograph, they feel like they need this like sensor data to validate it. Or in the case of research, it is very important to have that sensor data to validate a photograph. Yeah, so I just want to end on that, because I'm very excited about this sort of integration of Floodwatch and flood sensors, and I think it's a really exciting next step. And thank you for all being interested in it, because I don't get a lot of chances to share it with everyone, so I'm glad you're interested in it.